Welcome to week 4 of the course. So this is module 4 and this is the week when the first project is due. And I'm creating this short video to go over the project, to discuss some of the questions that are asked, and to specifically go over some of the models that you're going to be working with. And one thing you will notice that these are models that are very similar to what you have already done. The only difference here is that you're working with a new data set and you are required to do the R script yourself. So let's now look into the project. We will start off with the summary report, and then I will briefly talk about the data set that you're working with. So here is the summary report, and you will notice that this looks very similar to the summary report for the problem sets that you have been working with. And so again, it starts with an introduction part. So here you have to address these questions. Now, since this is a project, we do expect that you will take some time to understand the data set and to write up we don't want you to write a full page of introduction, but at least a paragraph where you are able to address these questions in some detail. And my suggestion also is to, once you have done the report and you've worked with all of the models and you know exactly what you're analyzing, that you come back to the introduction and address this question. So what type of analyses are you running in this project? So please make sure to describe exactly what you are going to be doing in these later sections. And you can even include a line or two on what you found interesting in your results. So then the next step is the data prep. So this we will um, go over in Codio. So I will briefly talk about the data set and what kind of variables we're working with. So please make sure to explain that here. And then here is the first model. So this is a first order regression model with quantitative and qualitative variables. And this section starts off with correlation analysis. So you're going to create scatter plots. These are the two scatter plots that you're going to do. And then you're going to describe the trend. So please make sure to describe this in some detail. Don't just say that there is a linear trend. You do have to talk a little bit about if the trend is there, why do you think it's there? Okay, so for example, if this living area increases, does the price decrease or does it increase? And is that intuitive to you that it does that? Okay, so please make sure to talk about that. Um, then the next is to report the correlation coefficients between these variables. So price and living area and price and age of home. Um, Very simple. This is just correlation analysis. So you're going to create a correlation matrix, and using that matrix, you will be able to get the correlation coefficients for these variables. So if you recall, this has been done in module 1 and module 2. So please make sure to look at the assignment preps there. And then the last bullet is describe the strength and direction. So for the correlation coefficient, there are two things that are important. First, you have to make sure that you describe whether it's a negative or positive correlation, and also discuss whether the scatter plot agrees with the sign of the correlation coefficient, whether it's positive or negative. Okay, so please make sure to talk about that. And then the other is the strength. So is the correlation um, strong, moderate, or weak? Okay, so for each correlation coefficient that you get here, please make sure to discuss its relationship to the scatter plots and then discuss whether the correlation is weak, moderate, or strong, and whether it's positive or negative. So next we will be reporting results for the first model. And so this in this project, we're working with a housing data set, and the task is to predict the price of a home based on several predictor variables. So, for example, the first model here, we're trying to predict the price of the home based on the living area, grade of the home, number of bathrooms, the type of view as predictors. Okay, and clearly in this case, the type of view is a qualitative variable, while all these other predictors are quantitative variables. So this is the model that you have to create. It's a first order model. Okay, so I expect that you'll be able to do this. It There's also a note here. It clarifies variables that are quantitative and then the view as a qualitative variable. So first you will write the general form of the equation for the regression model. Then you will create the model. So again, you will write the R code to do this. You will get R square and adjusted R square for the model. Make sure to interpret it and make sure to do this correctly. This is slightly challenging, but we've gone over this several times, and I'm sure you've also received feedback on this. Um, and so please make sure to um, properly interpret what R square is and what is adjusted R square. Then you will interpret the beta estimates, okay, for living area and view that is a lake view. You will obtain the residuals and fitted values, and then these are the two plots that you have to create, and you have to comment on uh, whether the model that you created is valid, okay, whether the assumptions are met or not. So make sure to discuss, the model statistics, and once you have discussed those, then the next step is to figure whether the model is actually valid. And for the model to be valid, we know that we have to analyze these two plots. And so please make sure to do that in some detail. Um, Clearly specify why you think the model can or cannot be used based on these assumptions. If the assumptions are met, then clearly we can use the model. But if they're not met, then we have to be careful with using that model. Next is evaluating significance. So again, we will carry out the overall F-test for the model, and then we will carry out the individual t-tests. Please make sure when you do this step that you clearly specify what is your null hypothesis and what is your alternative hypothesis. Okay, so it says here to identify the null hypothesis, alternative hypothesis. So those should be clearly specified not only in words but also in a mathematical form. Okay. Then specify what your p-value for the test is in your output, in the R output, and then discuss the conclusion of the test based on that p-value, and note that we're using a 5% level of significance. So please make sure to describe this other than the null and the alternative hypothesis, where you will have to sort of use the equation editor to write the mathematical form of those hypotheses, and then explain them in words. Please make sure to describe the rest of this in a paragraph form. Okay. And once you have reached your conclusion whether you should reject or not reject the null hypothesis, please make sure to also discuss the implications of that. What does it mean if I'm rejecting the null hypothesis? So um, please make sure to discuss that as well for both the overall F test and the individual beta test, that is the t test. Okay, and then next, then once you have evaluated the significance, you will just do your predictions. So this is also something we've been doing almost every week. So you will predict the price for a home given these values. You will obtain the 90% prediction interval and the 90% confidence interval, and then you will interpret them. Okay, so there are two of these that you have to do. Then please make sure to um, also describe why the prediction interval is wider than the confidence interval. So this is also something that we have discussed almost every week. Please make sure to be a little detailed on this. Um, this is a very important concept. The fact that the prediction interval is wider than the confidence interval has to do a lot with, um, once if you're able to sort of answer this question, then it's a way to tell that you're grasping the concept of multiple regression. So the second model is a complete second order regression model with quantitative variables. So if you recall in module 3, we covered second order regression models. And if you look at the assignment prep for that module, you will notice that there is a complete second order regression model that we covered. So that will help you do this model. So here, again, we start with correlation analysis. Although you're not going to be calculating any correlation coefficient here, but you will create scatter plots and then comment on them. So again, please be sure to be detailed in your analysis here. Um, then for the reporting results, again, we start off with writing a general form of the model for price using age of appliances and crime rate as predictors. And you're going to write this for a complete second order regression model. Okay. And then, you'll create your model in R, you'll get your R square, adjusted R square. You will get these two plots and comment on the assumptions, whether the assumptions are met or not. Then you will evaluate significance of the model. Again, you will carry out the overall F-test, individual beta tests. Please be sure to specify the null and the alternative hypothesis, the mathematical form using equation editor as well as in words, and then use a paragraph to explain the conclusion of the test and whether it makes sense or not, just intuitive sense or not. Clearly, the statistical evidence will be reached, and you can say that that is kind of what you expected or whether you did not expect and the result was a little bit of a surprise to you. Then you'll do your predictions. And again, you will obtain the prediction and the confidence interval. Next, we will do nested models F-test. So here you will first create a model for price using age of appliances and crime rate per 100,000 people as predictors. Okay, so and both of these are going to be quantitative variables. So quantitative predictors include the interaction term between age of appliances and crime rate. So this is a first order model. So you will um, not include the square terms here. You will only include the first order terms for age and crime and their interaction, and that's it. Okay. And then you will create the model here. So here you have to write the general form and then you have to run the model in R and write out the equation. And then you will evaluate this model. So this is your third model for this project. So, and once you have evaluated this, then we will do the nested model F-test to do model comparison. We will compare this model that you just created, the first order model that you just created, with the second order model that you created in section 4, which is again here, and we just went over this. Section 4 includes a complete second order model. Okay, so if you notice, two predictors are the same in this case and the model in section 5, except that here you have the squared terms included, okay, for both um, age and crime, age of appliances and crime, okay. So the idea to do this nested models F-test for the model comparison is to evaluate whether those quadratic terms contribute in predicting the price. Or in other words, this model here in section 5, this is a subset of the complete second order model, right? It's pretty much the same except it doesn't include the square terms for age of appliances and crime. And so we want to see whether those square terms add any value in predicting the price. And that's why we're going to do the nested model F-test. So we will do the model comparison here. First, you have to answer a few questions. In general, what is a reduced and what is a complete model? So this is covered in Module 4 assignment prep. Write the general form of the model, that is the reduced. So for the two models that we're comparing, what is the reduced model? Okay, and you have to write the general form of that reduced model. Then you have to write the general form of the complete model. Okay, so then you can clearly see that one model is a subset of the other model. And then you have to actually do the nested model F-test. And you have to clearly, when we do any hypothesis test, we have to specify the null hypothesis, alternative hypothesis. Um, Again, in mathematical terms, using the equation editor and in words. And then use a paragraph to discuss the conclusion of the test and any other relevant information. So this is covered in Module 4, assignment prep, and there's also a lecture video that will be posted. So this is pretty much it, and then you have to conclude um, based on everything that you've seen, based on the analysis, the you got your equation, then you got your R square, adjusted R square, you did your significance testing for the model, and then you also did the plots to validate whether the assumptions of a regression model are met or not met. Based on all these different analyses that you've done for each model, you then have to discuss which model would you pick. If you had to pick one, which one would you pick? And what is the practical importance of the analysis that you have performed? Okay, so pretty much you have three models and one nested model F-test in this project. So let's now look into the data set that you're working with. So here is the Jupyter Notebook for Project 1. This is where you will be writing the R script. And it starts with the scenario information. So as you can see here, it says that you're a data analyst working for a real estate company. You have access to a large set of historical data that you can use to analyze relationship between different attributes of a house, such as square footage or the number of bathrooms, and the house's selling price. And so you have been asked to create different regression models to predict sale price based on some critical variable factors. Um, these regression models will help your company set better prices when listing a home for a client. So you can clearly see that this is a very relevant problem for a company like Zillow or Redfin, where you may have to um, do some kind of a model that can predict a sale price or give an estimated sale price. In fact, if you have ever used Zillow and you look at a home, you'll notice that it gives you estimates for how much that home is worth. And that's an estimate. It's not the price the home is listed at. So that estimate is created using a regression model or a predictive model. And essentially, your task here is to use regression modeling to come up with the models that we just covered in the summary report. So here are the variables. So price is the sale price of the home. This is going to be your response variable. This is what you're trying to predict. And these are the different features of the home. Um, Most of them are quantitative. There are a couple that are qualitative. Um, and as you can see here, backyard and view, these are the two qualitative variables, and the rest are quantitative variables. So the first step is actually just given to you, preparing your data set. So this you'll just be able to run, and you'll see that the number of columns, there are 22 columns, but 22 different variables, but these are the ones we're going to work with. And there are 2,692 rows. So this is a slightly larger data set that you've been working with. And that is the idea, is to try to give you a little bit of a real world scenario for the project. Even though I personally think that 2,600 is still fairly small sample size for what we deal with today, but it's going to be sufficient for you um, to see how regression modeling can be used on a larger data set. And then here are the three models. This is the first model. So th these are the different coding blocks where you will write your code. Okay, so you don't have to use all of them. You can just use one, or you can split the code into three or four. My suggestion is it's nice to use the different blocks so that you can clearly see what each block is doing. And then if you have an error or problem with a step, then at least your previous coding statements will work. So one line will not just make the entire code block unusable. Okay, so that's my suggestion, but this is up to you. Here's the second model. So you'll write the code here, and then the third model and the nested models F test you'll do here. And then you'll just attach this with your summary report. And this is pretty much the project.